that this meeting is being electronically recorded. I want to thank everyone for joining us, both committee members, administration, and those viewing at home for another meeting in unusual circumstances. For the committee's benefit, I'd like to proceed like we did in the special meeting last week, where when we are having discussion of an issue, just raise your hand. I can see your image, and I will call on you in turn, and we'll do it that way as best we can. With that, at this time, I will turn it over to Superintendent Stoyer for his report.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. I have a number of things to update the committee and community on. I think that perhaps I'll do these one at a time and pause for each one to see if there are questions. The first one is a follow-up to our meeting last Monday about April break. As I told you in an email last week, we did reach an agreement with the AEA on how we were going to conduct that. And I am pleased to report that, as we promised on Monday, we are able to offer a full week of learning to students during April break as a result of the move to move those 2 days to April break. It is a different week than the other ones in that we have only 2 school days, so only 2 work days for the teachers. But by canceling our normal meeting schedule and taking planning out of their day, we're able to offer enough support for students and families through communication and direct activities that we think that it'll be an adequate week of learning experiences for students. And, we've given them a lot of freedom to put that together in a way that we think will work for both them and families. So we would just really point out to families that they should pay close attention to how the plan is set up for next week, because it'll be a little bit different in terms of when things are scheduled to make the week work for teachers. But on the whole, it should be a comparable experience to what students have been getting already. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions about April break specifically.
Anybody have any questions about that? Comments? No? All right.
All right, moving on. I'm sure many of you have heard the good news that MCAS has been suspended for the 2019-2020 school year. I think thanks must go out to our local legislative delegation who worked hard to help get us. We'll give the commissioner the freedom to make that choice, which he executed pretty swiftly. We learned of that news late last week, and we are in full agreement that both, from a logistical standpoint, I'm not sure people understand how complicated and how much of a commitment MCAS really is for school districts. It dominates school life for 2 full months. And so really, when we didn't start testing in the end of March, beginning of April, from our perspective, we were really facing a pretty significant problem on how to make that work. So there was a logistical concern, but also, there's the fairness of it all. How can we test given what's happened? Even if we return to school and somehow logistically we were able to pull it off, it's not really a fair assessment of students given the experience that we're having. And to just remove this anxiety over our work was a big relief. And so we're very appreciative that the state did the right thing. And we are happy that we can cross that off the list of concerns. Now, there are implications for high school kids in particular, competency determinations and, just like things like, what's going to happen to 9th and 10th graders who are going to take high stakes exams this year. We're waiting for more guidance from the state, and we will inform high school parents as that comes along. No guidance yet from the state on that.
Anyone have any questions on MCAS, both this year, the cancellation, or plans for moving ahead?
Nope.
Can committee members who aren't speaking mute their microphones just to clear up any background noise, please? Thank you. All right, no questions. So carry on, Superintendent Sawyer.
Thank you, Chairman Withers. The next thing I wanted to talk about was grading. In trying to sort out what we're doing about grading, we've made an important distinction in the way that we're thinking about the issue, and we'd like to separate out the assessment of student work, the things that we're assigning currently under remote learning, right? Those assignments need to be assessed. Teachers need to give them feedback. Students need to know how they are performing on the work that they're doing, right? So whether it's I give you an essay and you give me comments back, or whether you give me 10 problems to do and I get 7 of them right, either of those, whether it's those comments themselves or the idea that I got 7 out of 10 of the questions right, that feedback, that assessment of performance is an important part of the learning experience, and that's something that we expect to happen during remote learning. That's different from grading. That's different from turning that performance into a grade. So like the example I gave, I might have gotten 7 out of 10 questions right that you gave me, but that's what we are going to give that kind of feedback back. But there's no need to turn that into a 70%. Oh, well, that's a C-, right? That extra step is the step that we're not going to take while we're closed, while we're operating under remote learning. It doesn't make sense to us for a lot of reasons that I could get into if there are questions about it. But the important idea here is that we are going to provide feedback. We are going to assess student performance, the assigned work that we're giving, but we're not going to turn that into any sort of grade. And between now and when we figure out whether or not we are returning to school or going to stay out of school for the rest of the year, that's sort of when we'll decide exactly how we're handling this period and what we're doing during it in the context of end of year grades, which is a whole nother discussion, and one that we feel like we have more time on and are taking some more time on.
Any questions on grading, evaluation, how the remote learning is going up to this point? No? Okay. Superintendent Sawyer, carry on.
So I just alluded to it. I just wanted to touch base. I'm getting a lot of questions about how long are we going to be out of school? Are we really going back on May 4th? I just wanted to let everybody know that there's been zero indication from the state on what we can expect on this. Honestly, I don't think that they know what they're going to do and are keeping it a secret. I think that they don't know what they're going to do. I think they desperately wish to return to normal. There are a lot of reasons why they want that to happen as quickly as possible. I think that's a very sincere desire on their part, as it is, I think, for many of us, right? I would love to go back to school too. I know everyone in my house would like to be able to leave the house. That being said, there are a lot of reasons to worry about whether that's really going to happen this year. And so I think they're going to put off that decision until they feel like they have to. And we'll have to wait for that. So from now until May 4th, we're going to operate on the parallel track of preparing for a return to school in May, if that becomes possible, but also starting to do some advanced thinking about what are we going to do if we get closed for the remainder of the year and have to stay home until the school year closes. There are a lot of implications to that. Most obviously, what are we going to do about graduation and things like that? But we're going to start to think about those things now and not wait until it's upon us. But we're not going to overinvest in those solutions because maybe it'll work out more optimistically than it feels like it will in this moment. So no news from the state. I hope that we have a little bit of a better sense of it this time than we did with some of the decisions that came down at the end of March. But either way, we're going to prepare for both of those outcomes, and certainly we'll pass along whatever we find out as we find it out. But as for now, May 4th is still the date that we're operating with.
Mr. Geddes.
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. So, Mr. Sawyer, I know last week you mentioned that you expect a decision to come probably sometime the last week of April. Can you see a situation where they push back opening again, or do you think it's kind of with only 6 weeks left, 6 or 7 weeks left, it's an all or nothing proposition. If we open on May 4th, we're open. If we don't open by May 4th, then we're just done for the year.
In some of the original guidance, the state gave back in March, there was reason to believe that it was sort of an all or nothing at the beginning of May. I do think that now that the economic picture is as grim as it is, if they think that by waiting a week or two, they could have a different outcome, I think they would consider that. So I'm not sure that's exactly true that it's all or nothing in that moment. But I will say there isn't much of a window past the beginning of May in which they could keep that decision off and expect schools to be able to plan for the impact in either direction, right? At some point,
Right.
we get into May and, not knowing becomes a real obstacle to doing anything.
Right.
So I would say that by mid-May, we're going to know one way or the other.
Thank you.
Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Sawyer, I kind of asked about this last week. First of all, I applaud you guys for being proactive. When it comes to graduation, ideally, obviously, we, come back in May and somehow or another we hold a graduation at the end of May. But in case that doesn't happen, have we started to have discussions on what would be the best plan if we can't have that graduation in May or June?
Yeah, we have begun discussions about that. Principal Rooney and I have had a couple conversations. We're trying to figure out what all our options are. I mean, most simply, I think the three basic options are to postpone it, to cancel it, or to do it virtually is really what it comes down to. Neither of us like the idea of canceling it entirely. I think that there are a lot of reasons why that would not be our first preference. And if there's something we could do with some of those other options, we're going to really dig in and try to make one of the other ones work before we arrive at that sort of stark conclusion. As for postponing, there are a lot of reasons why that might not be the best option for us. Without any sort of knowledge of when we'll be able to hold a large public event like that, it's hard to know how to plan for something like that. Plus, the farther we get away from early June, the more people we lose that are not available to participate in that. Quite frankly, right in mid-June, we start losing some students who have already signed up for the military. And assuming those timelines haven't been changed by the virus, they're off for training. So, the longer we go, the less inclusive that experience will be. Plus, I was watching something, and last week, Dr. Fauci said he's optimistic that we might be able to open the schools in September. A comment like that catches my ear. Not that he's setting policy here in Massachusetts, and one of the things he said, I think yesterday, made me feel better that we're all going to go sort of on local, regional decision making, right? You have to fight the virus based on the conditions on the ground. So perhaps we could be more optimistic around here. But the postponement has some real problems. So right now we're doing some investigating on what our virtual options are, and we hope to be able to bring back a conversation about what we could do in the near future.
As far as a virtual, would it be virtual for the students and families, or are you looking at something where the students would still be possibly in person while the viewing would be virtual?
So if having an event of that many people is allowable, we would certainly be talking about including the students. But given the desire to get this in sooner than later, it might be virtual for everybody, including you all and myself and the high school administration. If we think we can deliver a reasonable graduation experience that's affordable in a virtual setting, that's something we're going to really take a look at.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sawyer?
Okay, the last thing on my list this evening is I just wanted to update the committee that Mr. Furtado and I had a conference call with the mayor at the end of last week. to discuss FY21. There's a lot more unknowns than knowns. So, we don't have any real details to share with you. But the two takeaways that I wanted to share with the committee this evening is one, the mayor verified that from his perspective, we're still using the same numbers that he gave us at the end of February. So that number is roughly 82 million. Mr. Furtado can talk a little bit more about that during his presentation. But that number hasn't changed. And so we're going to continue using that number until such time as things do change. I do know that, the State House is working through its process and trying to think about how it's going to deliberate the budget. And, we look forward to hearing more about that process and any, indication of what to expect from it. I know that some of the forecasting that we're hearing about is grim. And so, we do have some real concerns about whether or not the context will change from what I'm describing right now. But I was encouraged that at least in this moment, we're still on track. The other point was simply that if things were to change, the mayor made it very clear that his priority, as it has been throughout his administration, is to prevent layoffs. And as a pretty heavily personnel-laden department, we were very much in agreement that we need people to execute what we do in the school department, and we would be partners in trying to do what we can to prevent the need for that. So that was about the long and the short of that conversation. But as always, it was positive and productive, and we will keep you informed as more details become available.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Furtado is going to have a more detailed budget presentation.
Yes, he's going to talk more specifically.
Okay. Yep. Great. Thank you.
So at this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Ms. Regan, who would like to update you on remote learning in the district.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. So first, I want to thank everyone that was involved in helping to create the system within which we're operating right now, starting from all the administrators, the educators, the paraprofessional staff, everyone that was involved. Also, I'd like to thank the students and the families that are actually, being a part of this first week of remote learning. I know it was a big undertaking for a lot of people. So thank you for doing this with us. I did want to share, though, that as part of remote learning, we looked at a lot of different options and what it could look like for us in Attleboro. And so some of the pieces that were included in remote learning were video conferences, short video lessons, practicing solving problems, writing short pieces. So all of those things are what we consider remote learning. And the three things that we centered that around, or the three principles that we were focusing on, were one, engagement, making sure that we engaged all of our students in part of this process. We wanted to make sure that we didn't leave anyone out. We were making sure that we had access, or providing access to all of our students using digital and non-digital options. That included passing out, at this point, over 1,000 Chromebooks to our students and families that needed them. I want to make sure that I thank Mr. Furtado and his tech team behind the scenes that continue to work to support all of our students and families that require a device at home. Right now, one of the things that we're focusing on is providing access for our students who need the internet at home. So that includes reaching out to some internet providers, because they are providing free services, as well as researching different hotspots that are located throughout the city. And then also connecting our students with some of our cell phone providers that are available and providing free internet service. So we wanted to make sure that they all had access to what we were doing. And the final piece of this whole frame is providing our students with feedback, communicating how they're doing on these remote learning assignments, and giving them some, growth producing feedback to inform their instruction and to know what we need to do next in our process. One other thing that I did want to share with you is that this week we received, and last week as well, we received some feedback about the remote learning plans. And so we are taking a close look at them and seeing if there are some ways that we can streamline them, make them more user-friendly for all families and for students. We wanted to also make you aware that on our website, we have a tab. It's the COVID-19 tab all the way to the right. If you click on that, you'll see that we have a listing of all of our community resources that are available. We have all of our digital learning options that are available. And we also have all of our remote learning plans that are listed there. So you can see all of the plans that are available to students K through 12. And then finally, this week, we are going to be sending out a survey to families. We really want to hear from everyone. We want to know if we are communicating enough with all of you. Are we sharing too much information? Are we sharing not enough information? And so we've never done this before. We've never participated in a pandemic and had to close school for an extended number of weeks. And so we want to know what we can do better to support our families and to make this experience as most manageable as we can possibly make it. So any other questions about the remote learning plans to date?
Questions? No? Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to call on Ms. Medeiros to talk a little bit about what we're doing with special education.
Hi, everyone. So like Ms. Regan, I want to particularly thank all staff, but particularly the special educators who really shown their professionalism, their collaboration, and their extreme work ethic and their relationship with families and students. They've made my life easier here as the director of special education. So one of the first things that we needed to do was establish points of contact for all 1,100 students here in Attleboro that are on IEPs. So our staff has done that. They've been pretty consistent communication with our families in doing that. And unlike general education, we have had no, the federal regulations and state regulations have remained in effect for us. So we are to provide special education services as if we were in school, which is pretty difficult to do because we are depending on our parents and our families to be the special education provider, our counselor, nurse, all of those things. So our staff is working very hard with our families to not only provide resources through the remote learning plans, but also to provide and instruct our families who are now providing the special ed services. So they've done work with the remote learning plans and taking the template that we've created from the district perspective and then aligning those to IEP services and kind of individualizing that for students that way. They then established, like all of our educators have established office hours to provide support in providing those services and helping families provide those services. The next piece of it is they now kind of working on this week a way to document the way that they're providing services for every student on their IEP. Our next phase is to begin to roll out how to do virtual team meetings, whether we do that quite often in out of district, but now kind of aligning that to an in district. So in addition to rolling out special ed services, we've had to build many systems that we wouldn't have as if we were in session. So that, our team chairs and our technology department are doing a lot of work behind the scenes to build the system so that we can do the work that we need to do. But I think that that's been a learning process for all of us. And then in the meantime, we're also preparing for extended school year. We're preparing as if we were open, and we're also preparing as if we had to do it through a remote learning process. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're also working on our projected enrollments and building a system for helping students and families transition to next year's programs, whatever the team has recommended. So I don't know if you have any questions around special education.
Any questions? No, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. To provide some insight into what we're doing with human resources, I will call on Ms. Singer.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Just wanted to reiterate how wonderful a job our staff are doing and the families and the circumstances that they face today. We continue in the HR office to execute the daily functions and operations of the HR office remotely, of course. Processing retirements, verifications of employment, the things that still go on, just a little trickier to do remotely. But I do also want to thank the payroll office has been phenomenal on making sure one of the biggest pieces that we've been doing collaboratively is communicating with staff. They want to make sure that their safety and security of their livelihood continues through this time. And I think the more we're communicating with them about what that process looks like and being extremely responsive to questions and implementing processes for them to kind of ease their anxiety as much as we can about those things so that they can do what they're great at doing, which is educating our students. So we are also still working with the union leaderships to strategize about how we're moving forward with negotiations with all of our units, continuing to update staff on, there are new federal regulations and guidelines being put out now related to this. So the Families First Corona Act, Response Act, we've posted that on our website. There have been changes to some Blue Cross Blue Shields services. So we've been posting that. We've really just tried to communicate as best as possible and get that information out there for our staff, again, to ease their anxiety about things as much as we possibly can. So we're now beginning the process of looking at evaluation, which we'll have more updates on later. But now that we've kind of gotten through the first several weeks of making sure people are being paid and things are moving as smoothly as possible, we can move into the next realm of what we need to focus on. That's about it for me. Anybody have any questions?
No questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. Singer.
Thank you.
All right, and to close us out here, we only bring them in to talk about the important stuff. I'll turn it over to Mr. Furtado.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. I too have to give a shout out to staff. The business office has remained operational in the building. Certainly not full time, but we've got someone there every day. We haven't missed any bill payments. We've been managing a very difficult grants process because on the other end, DESE has been kind of wrestling with what they're going to do. So the staff there has done a remarkable job in that environment. We pushed through to the finish of a single audit on the city side successfully. So great work by them. As Julianne said, the payroll office has been just on top of everything. And in addition to that, we've transitioned during this time our clerical staff and our drivers and bus monitors over to biweekly payroll as of this Thursday. So an extraordinary amount of work there. OIT, I can't say enough about what they did in the past 2 weeks was extraordinary. My hat's off to John and his staff. They really came through for the district and for the students. Our custodial and maintenance staff have been on site from the beginning, have not gone off site, and Sodexo, who has provided planning, training, and resources to be working in this environment. And when we sit down and we wonder why we have a contracted vendor, there's no way that we as a district could ever have gotten through this situation in terms of cleaning supplies and plans and training the way we have. As Superintendent Sawyer has said many times, we haven't had a case of transmission within the district. Everything has been brought into the district. They've done an exceptional job. Regarding the budget, FY20, as Superintendent Sawyer said, the mayor basically said, run it like you normally would. We're going to do that. I think we're going to be fine. We've got some holes to fill, but we have some resources available to fill them. So I think 20 will be a pretty normal year. It'll be tight, but it'll be a pretty normal year for us. 21 is going to be a significant challenge. I heard today something about the House targeting May as the time frame, mid-May, for them to kind of figure out budget issues. So we're a ways away from the state kind of settling down on what's going on, and that will determine what happens to us in 21. We have followed the city's direction and started to talk to our unions about the economic realities. But again, we won't really know the facts on that until the state starts producing some numbers, which from my perspective won't be happening until May. Other than that, all is going well.
Any questions for Mr. Furtado or the superintendent about the budget process, where we are, anything related there too? Mr. Domenici?
Mark, as always, I always appreciate the updates, and maybe this question might have to even go upwards to the city administration, but do we see the potential with the delays in the State House that having also a ripple effect here in the city on finalizing a budget by the end of the fiscal year? Or are there, do we know if there's just anything in place that states that things are kind of status quo or business as usual if we have to go beyond that deadline?
I can't imagine that the city has the resources to deal with some of the problems that are going to erupt on their own. So I think they would have to wait patiently for the state to kind of identify ways to address the problems that are going to be existing in 21 before they can make any kind of budget decision.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I just add that the state has passed a 1/12 budget for the month of July, which is a strong indication that they have concerns that they will not have a budget in place for June 30th. So if the state doesn't, that means that the city doesn't, which means that we don't. So I think sometime between now and June, as these things unfold, I think there's a real possibility that we will be facing entering the summer without a very clear picture of exactly what we're going to have, which obviously will pose all kinds of challenges to us. But these are the things that we'll have to work ourselves through.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the mayor is saying to go forward with the same budgeting projections that we had last year. I know a couple of months ago it was reported that we had about a $2 million shortfall across the city. So I'm excited that we're getting the same commitment that we had last year, and worry about cuts elsewhere, but that's not at all in our purview. To kind of piggyback on what Mr. Domenici asked, if that shortfall is, for whatever reason, becomes larger between now and then, and I know the administration, the mayor's administration has made it a point to avoid layoffs at all costs across all city departments. But is there, if the state budget comes in later and the city budget comes in later, and if they're in an absolute worst case scenario, any type of staffing action has to happen, how does that, what's the implication there in terms of our timeline with notifying staff?
Yeah, so for us to do a reduction in force for, to be in place before the start of the next school year, that has to all people have to be notified by June 15th. And I think there's good reason to worry, which I think is what your question is getting at, that we're not going to know where we stand until after June 15th.
Right.
So that, that causes all kinds of trouble with, needing to bring people back to lay them off at that point, which there are all kinds of negative ramifications of, but it is, the circumstances that we're facing, and, these are unprecedented, right? Like, we have faced not only budget problems, but budget crises before. But, usually it's on a timeline that, you at least understand where you are by that point. And there's reason to worry that we're not going to really have a good picture of it at that point. But, I do think that for some people who are going to be following the crisis, it's important to point out that our finances are a little bit different from the cities. It's all city money, and it's all related to tax revenues. So, I understand how it kind of gets muddled together, but, in the end, our budget is a function of Chapter 70, right? So, there's a new law in place that gave a number. And usually, in the past, we've been worried about numbers because the number it was giving us was, well short of a reasonable number. While the number it gave us this year was disappointing, I mean, it was still a decent increase. So, as long as the legislature doesn't reduce the Chapter 70 money down from what it's legally obligated to do, that's a significant portion of the issue for us. There's that, and then there's the city's commitment, which at this time the mayor has made clear he's sticking to. So with those two things in place, we would be fine. It's really about whether or not things at the state level get so bad that they do something different with Chapter 70.
Excellent. Thank you. And it was, for whatever reason, I had it in my head that the deadline was much earlier, so that it's June 15th is actually a bit of a relief.
Oh,
and
okay.
again, knowing that that's an absolute last case scenario. But thank you very much.
Any other questions on the budget? No? All right. Mr. Sawyer, anything else?
No, that concludes my report. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you to the administration as a whole. Thank you for everything you've been doing the last few weeks as well. Next, we have minutes from our March 9th, 2020 and April 6th, 2020 meetings. This time I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion or edits or changes? All right, seeing none, I'll ask you all to unmute your microphone. I'm going to do a roll call vote. I'm going to start with Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
You only have to say yes once.
Once.
And Mr. Withers, yes. So motion passes. Next, we have the consent agenda tonight. I'm going to do it a little bit differently because each vote has to be a roll call. I am going to read the consent agenda items and then ask for a motion to accept as a whole, second, and then we'll vote on the whole as a slate. So we have a motion to accept a donation in the amount of $60 from Laura Cataloni to the Attleboro High School. A motion to accept a donation of $15.60 from Melissa Poyette to the Attleboro Public Schools lunch program to help resolve outstanding lunch balances. Motion to approve the donation of $1,000 from the Attleboro Elks to the Attleboro High School Drama Club. Motion to accept the rebate check from the donation box for February 2020 in the amount of $8 from Bay State Textiles, Inc. Inventory purchase to Hill Roberts Gifts donation line. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $9 from Kathleen Reuter, the Attleboro Public Schools lunch program to help resolve outstanding student lunch balances. And a motion to accept the donation in the amount of $7.45 from Donna Lewis to the Attleboro Public Schools Lunch Program to help resolve outstanding school lunch balances. Do we have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Geddes?
With all of the donations related to school lunches, I was wondering if the administration has a plan if it does come to a point where the rest of the school year is closed. Anyone that does have outstanding lunch balances, do you guys already have a plan for refunding that money, or where does that stand?
At the end of every year, we, for parents who have money available in their student accounts, we offer them two options. We can refund them with a 1099 filled out, or we can transfer them to a siblings account if they still have students in the district. Finally, they can offer to apply it to someone with a deficit.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, there's one item, I was looking at the wrong, the older version of the agenda, so we'll go ahead and vote on this since it's been moved in second, then we'll have one more item. So Mr. Withers, yes. Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Larson. Yes. Okay. Next, we have final item on the consent agenda, which I missed the first time through. Motion to accept an anonymous donation in the amount of $3,900 to the Attleboro Public Schools to be used as the superintendent deems is the best use.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All right. Mr. Withers, yes. Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Thank you. Next, we have open forum. We have the capability through this program to answer questions. So at this time, I'd ask anyone watching if they want to address the committee at open forum. They can type a question in, and we can answer it for you. While we're giving people time to do that, I will, in full openness, read a question that was posted by one of the viewers a little while ago, which was, has there been any discussion on how the AHS valedictorian and salutatorian process will now happen for our seniors? The superintendent informs us that the high school administration is developing a plan where the decision on when and if we return will have a significant impact, so it is still a work in progress. I'm just going to give another 30 seconds to see if anyone wants to type in any questions. All right, I will close open forum. Next, we have executive session. The Attleboro School Committee will convene in an executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Sections 21A2 and 3, to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations with union personnel and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. The school committee will not reconvene in open session. Before, actually, can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Second.
Before we do a roll call vote, just for committee members' purposes, Ms. Singer sent out a link to a new Zoom room for the executive session meeting. So when we're done with this vote, we can sign off this Zoom conference call and then sign into the other meeting that was sent out for executive session. Any questions? Mr. Withers, yes. Ms. Porto,
Yes.
Mr. Domenici,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer,
Yes.
Mr. Storrs,
Yes.
Mr. Geddes,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everyone, and I'll see you in a minute or so in executive session. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.